Today's lesson is on purling. We've been doing some knitting, and I hope that while I've been gone, you've been knitting away as well. If so, you should have something that looks like this. It doesn't have to look exactly like this. You may have some mistakes there. That's okay. Nothing wrong with that. It's just a practice. But what you'll probably see is a lot of bumps, and you turn it over, and it's a lot of bumps on the other side. In fact, one side looks exactly the same as the other side. That's because what we've been knitting is called garter stitch, where you knit one row, you turn it over, and you knit the next row. Now, if you look at this more closely, you'll see that you have a row of bumps, and then you have, right above that are some V's, and then bumps, and then V's. You kind of have to stretch out your knitting to see that, but it's a row of bumps, and then a row of V's, and bumps, and V's, and bumps, and V's. That's because, and this is something that as a knitter you will learn, and people who aren't knitters, they don't know this, that knitting and purling are exact opposites. A purl stitch is a backwards knit stitch, and a knit stitch is a backwards purl stitch. So when you knit on one side, that's the same as purling on the other side. That probably doesn't make any sense right at the moment, but it will make some sense later. So what we're going to learn today is purling. And the reason that you want to learn how to purl is that when you combine knitting and purling together, you can knit almost anything. Almost any kind of intricate pattern that you'll ever see is a combination of knit and purl. It's just a matter of what order they are in. So, let's start. To do a purl stitch, you hold the yarn the same way you've been holding it. You hold all the stitches on the needle in your left hand, the empty needles in your right. You do your yarn around your baby finger, under the two fingers, over your pointer finger. You hold the empty needle. Now, if we were going to start the knit row, you remember that you would point the needle from front to back and catch the yarn. But we're not going to do that. We're going to do a purl stitch. And to do a purl stitch, you actually hold the yarn in the front. Now, I want to show you something when you do this. This is how we had it before. You had the yarn in the back doing a knit stitch and you're front to back. Okay, so now when you hold the yarn in the front of the needle, look what happens. This first stitch all of a sudden has turned into two stitches. Well, it really hasn't turned into two stitches. It just looks like it's two stitches. There's the actual stitch right here. This two-stitch thing is just the loop from the row before. But you see it right there, and it can be really confusing. That's why I want to show you. This is not the stitch, this little loop here. This is the stitch, the thing that my finger up here is touching. That is the stitch that you want to work with. Ignore this little loop down here. You want nothing to do with that. That's not your stitch. This is your stitch up here. Okay, so what you're going to do is you're going to take your needle, and it's like from the back to the front, like that, see? So, back to the front, like that. And then you use your thumb to wrap the yarn around it and pull that yarn through. Let me show you that again. So your needle is coming from the back, and you're holding your yarn in the front now. The needle's coming from the back. You loop that around with your thumb. When I purl, I always use my left thumb a lot to help. Holding the stitch with my middle finger this time, putting the needle from the back to the front, using my thumb to wrap it around, and pulling it off the needle. Now you can do that without using your thumb. You can kind of try and move it around like this, and that works. You put your needle from the back to the front, and you kind of use this needle to wrap it around like that. And that works, and then you tighten it up like that. Back to front. If you want to do it that way, you can do it that way. I just find it easier using my thumb as an extra tool. So back to front, and then I just do that with my thumb. I just kind of push it down. Just a little help. But either way, whatever way you like to do it, works. So back to front. There you go. Back to front. There you go. So that was a purl row. Now, let's see what we have on our needle here. When you look at the needle, you have all bumps. But look, those bumps are closer to these bumps. There are no V's in between. You look, there's not that row of V's that we had before. That's because we just did a purl row. And the side facing you, which is called the right side, is bumps. Now, what happens when we turn it around? Look at this. We have more V's on this side. Now I'm going to show you something really special. We just did that purl row. I'm going to knit a knit row. And what we're creating here is what's called stockinette stitch. It's called stockinette stitch because it's what stockings or socks look like. If you pull out a pair of socks and look at that, you will see that your socks have the V's on the outside and the bumps on the inside. Anyway, so you take, we're just going to knit this. You remember yarn wrapped around your left hand the way we do, front to back, just to regroup. We're going to knit a row, and then we're going to purl a row. So we're alternating rows. We're knitting. This is a knit row. And we're going to turn the needle back this way. Now it's time for another purl row. You see the pattern here. You knit a row, and then you purl a row. Then you knit a row, and then you purl a row. Okay, here we are to start the purl row. Don't forget, this is not your stitch. This loopy thing here, not your stitch. This is your stitch up here on the needle. So from back to front, loop that around, pull it off, loop around, pull it off. I just want to show you what this looks like as we're done. I'm just knitting this purl row. You can rewind the video to see it a little bit more slowly again. But I just wanted to show you what happens when you knit a row and then purl a row. Let's look at the front. This is now the front. Look at that. See all those V's? So it's knit, and then we purled, and then we knit, and then we purled, and you get this nice flat knitted front. And on the back, it's really bumpy. See, can you see the difference in those bumps? Like these rows of bumps are close together, and these are kind of more separate. So this is garter stitch on the bottom. This is stockinette stitch, where you knit a row, purl a row, knit a row, purl a row. And that's how most things are knit, with stockinette stitch, which is why it's important to learn how to purl. It's when you knit and stockinette stitch, that what you end up is creating a fabric that drapes nicely. You can make terrific sweaters out of stockinette stitch. You can make scarves and blankets. You can make socks. You can make hats. You can make all kinds of things out of stockinette stitch. And it's just a lighter, softer way of making a fabric. So I just knit a row, and now I am purling a row. And this is going to be the last row I'm going to do for this little demonstration. I just want you to see yet again how this is different from garter stitch, which is what we started with. So, just to review, this first bit that we did was garter stitch, where we just knit back and forth. Knit a row, knit a row, knit a row, knit a row, knit, 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 knit. And you get this garter stitch, which is the same on the front and the back. Then we changed, and we knit a row and then purled a row. So it's knit a row, purl a row, knit a row, purl a row, knit a row. And on the front side, you get this flat set of V's, and on the back side, you get this close together bumpiness. So that's knit and purl. So do a little bit of that until you feel comfortable with knitting and purling, and then we will go on from there.